So in this video, I'm going to share how I found myself effectively trapped in a situation where I came within 1 meter face to face with my rapist for a good few seconds. So what the situation was is that I'd agreed to meet the police at 5 to 9 outside the court. This is day one of my retrial. My brother had kindly escorted me to the court, so there was three of us when I met the police officer stood outside. And obviously, after the first hellos and everything, my first question was, which door is he coming in? What time is he arriving? And where is he? To which the police didn't have a clue, which isn't their problem or their fault at all, because their instruction was just to coordinate with me and support me for the day. But the police don't actually have any communication with the defence or the CPS at all. Their responsibility is strictly the survivor. To which the police explained that to me and said, let's just get in as quickly as possible, so then we can all get to the back room as quickly as possible too. So I walked in with the police and my brother. I was in the middle. Now, if you're not familiar with walking into Crown Court, it's very similar to walking through an airport. You have to go through like a metal detector. You have to take out all the contents of your pockets, your bag you have to open and they search inside. Take your belt off, take your shoes off, take your coat off, all the usual jazz. And in this particular Crown Court, there was three metal detectors. So we all went through separately. I'd emptied all my pockets, taken everything off, and by default, you have to be greeted by a security guard that has a handheld device that scans over you to make sure you haven't got a knife rammed down your sock or something. So I'm stood there in effectively the crucifix position, being scanned, and then he asked me to turn around. So I did. And as I turned around, I'm then again stood in the crucifix position as this man continued to scan me with this metal detector machine. And as I look forward, waiting at the same metal detector door frame thing that I've just come through, was my rapist and his wife stood about 2.5 meters away from me. So my first instinct was to look across at my brother, but he was now facing the other way because he was also being scanned by a security guard. And then I looked at the police and she was also facing the other way. So it was just me facing the entrance of the actual court, facing forwards, looking directly at my rapist and his wife. I won't go into detail of the facials that I received, but let's just say none of us, of all three of us, were smiling at one another. To make matters worse, I then was finished with the security guard, him scanning me with this device, and I had to walk forward back to the box where all my possessions were in, on top of the table that they were stood the other side of. So it was like a child's school table with a box on top of it, where it had my pocket things for my pockets, all the small things like my lip chap or my headphones and my mobile phone and things like that. And then I had my bag, I had my belt, I had my shoes, I had my coat. So it wasn't just something I could just get to quickly and be departed quickly. By this point, I'm literally 1 meter away from them. I'm not making any eye contact at this point, but as you can imagine, it was very, very uncomfortable. And I would actually go as far as saying rather intimidating. In my very first court hearing, I was in a different building and there was a side door. And that was the way that I got into the building on the last hearing. I kind of assumed it would be the same on this one, but there was no side door that we were aware of. Well, I was aware of and the police were aware of. And if there was a side door, it certainly wasn't made clear. But why the hell is a rapist and the person that they raped being asked to arrive at exactly the same time in exactly the same court in exactly the same door? For me, this is so easy to overcome. It's not a new legislation. It would be very inexpensive to coordinate. And yet these things happen, which I think is further examples of when people are faced with something that is yet another layer of lack of protection, or part of your dignity is just stripped away from you through effectively negligence. Any survivor that has weathered years in the justice system and has got as far as getting to court, I'd be very surprised if they're not burnt out, emotionally burnt out. And these types of things could risk jeopardizing the entire court case, because it certainly makes it much harder for the survivor to give evidence when they're faced with something like this that is so triggering on the nervous system. I can assure you, when you walk into court and you're hours away from going on stand, you're pretty nervous. Your heart is pounding. You've had well, in my case, I'd had 6 years of my nervous system being tested. And then hours before actually getting there, I'm faced with a situation like that. It's the absolute basics to get the prosecution and the defense team and the people involved with that to turn up at different times or at different doors. How this isn't standard, I do not know. But I also don't really get the impression that many people give a monkeys because that's the system. And I also don't have a personal beef around anybody within the system. And I certainly don't have a beef with the police. They were great. But even the people that I met within the CPS, they were good people. But if you put a group of good people into a broken system, it doesn't mean that the system isn't still broken. You've just got good people within it. And that's the difficulty that we're faced with on something like this because it's not the people that are the problem. It's a system that has been set for hundreds of years that needs amending, and things like this just become a day in the life of this poor process. Nor am I sharing this story to put anybody off from stepping into it. I encourage everybody, if they're close to or want to report their assault, then to go to the police and do so. But the more you do that with your eyes wide open of what type of eventualities you might face, the more able you are to navigate through those and just make sure that you can do the right thing in advance to ensure that you're not faced with the same thing that I was. So I'm likely to make other videos in the future that aren't a million miles away from this one. But this one is an example of the types of things that a survivor has to stomach and survive in order to weather a system that was designed to protect them.